Hello and welcome to day 16 when we're going to be reading the book of Luke chapter 16. Yesterday we read Luke chapter 15 and we talked about the purpose of the parables Jesus told in the Gospels. And I let you know that Jesus told parables to point to something bigger. In other words, those stories where Jesus used those stories to signify something bigger. He used something in the natural to explain something more spiritual or something of more eternal value. Do you understand? So, for example, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost sheep, they were metaphors, stories which add metaphors to talk about salvation, to talk about how heaven values a soul that is saved. So that's what we learned yesterday, and that's what I highlighted yesterday. Number two thing you should know about parable, which is part of what I want to talk about today, is that you should understand that the meaning of the parable, the meaning of a parable, or the purpose of a parable, the person to tell you what the purpose of the parable is the person that told you the parable. In other words, what it means, only the person that said it has the right to decide what that parable means. Which means that you can't read the parable and then say, this is what this parable means to me. Yes, you can have your other lessons from the parable, but as it relates to why the parable was told, what is the purpose, what did he want you to learn? You can read the parable and then you learn other things, but why the parable was told, the purpose, why did he tell them, only Jesus can tell you, and there is always going to be one meaning, one purpose to it. Like I said, the parable of the lost coin, Jesus said those parables to let us know the value of one soul. That was clear. Do you understand? He started the parable by in telling the parable, he said, similarly, when one soul is saved, there is rejoicing in heaven. So that was why he told that parable. So, having said that, always have that at the back of your mind that the parables have one purpose. They have a reason. There was a reason why he told it, and you should always, at least at the barest minimum, before you then go on to learn other things from there, know why that parable was told. What was the parable about? This is a parable about salvation. Do you get my point? So, having said that, another thing to now explain is that despite the parables have one purpose, they have the reason why he said it, they have what they were actually pointing to. You can also learn from the way he told the story, the actors in the story, their mistakes and the like. So one of the parables and one of the parables in Luke chapter 16 is the parable of the steward. And here the purpose of the parable, why Jesus told the parable, is what we can see in Luke 16 um 11 to 12 and Luke 16:13. He told the parable to let us know that if you're not faithful in little, you can't be faithful in much. There is no two way to it. If you are lazy in just a little work they gave you, you can't then project and say, "Oh, if only I had a better job, I would not be lazy." No, Jesus is just saying, let us know that if you're lazy, if you're unfaithful in one thing, we can already assume, everybody, no one is wrong to assume that you would also be lazy when you get a better one. He that is faithful in little will be faithful in much. That's the purpose of that story of that man he told. So using that fictitious man, that story, that man that probably did not exist, to tell that story was just to tell us that if you're faithful in little, you'll be faithful in much. And if you are faithful in little, they would give you more. As it relates to God, you would more responsibilities and all that. That's the purpose. That's the number one reason. The second reason was that he told the parable to let us know that you can't serve God and mammon. You can't have two masters. So, how does it relate to the story, for example? So, the first one I said about being faithful in little and faithful in much. How does that, how, where did he get that? How did that story align with that? You see that that young man, the steward in this case, he was lazy. He himself said it. Jesus said, when the man asked him to come and give an account, he said, I am lazy. I can't dig. I can't do this. The reason why the master even called him in the first place to give account was because he heard stories that he was wasting his resources. So Jesus is saying that the summary of all this is that this young man, his master deciding to withdraw his resources from him, his master deciding, to take it away from him and maybe give it to another person, was because he was not faithful in it. And because he has not been faithful in this thing he has been given, nobody will commit to him something bigger. Do you understand? So that's the summary of that story, and that's how the first purpose of that, why Jesus told that parable. That's how we draw that understand the interpretation of that. The second, talking about money, that the reason why Jesus told that parable again was to emphasize that you can't serve two masters. It's not possible. You'd either love one or the other. This guy in this case he was employed by one master, the person that put him in the job, but he seemed to love the approval of other people, of the people he's meant, of the customers, such that he was wasting the resources. And because he wants the approval, he wants that when the master puts him away, he wants those people to accept him. It showed in how he managed the master's resources. So Jesus then point out to us that you can't serve two masters. You either be faithful to one and you hate the other, which is the story of this man. In trying to satisfy the customers, he was not serving, satisfying in this sense, not customer service like we have it now. He was wasting the resources. He was not doing the job as he ought to, just because he wanted the approval of the customers. In doing that, he was he was not serving his master well. So that's how that story tells that summary that I gave, that you can't serve two masters. And in this case, Jesus then said that similarly with money, we understand that mammon here was talking to money. I hope this is making sense. Other lessons now. So aside those two reasons, the major reasons why Jesus told this story was those things I've said. Another lesson, perhaps, now that you can now learn based on your interpretation of the parable, for me, for example, is that Jesus talked about it, but that's not his main point. He just mentioned it, that what this guy did is quite commendable. He was shrewd, he was cunning. You say in local parlance, Nigeria, you say he had street OT. He had street credibility. He was smart. He was street smart to know that, wait, though, if this my master is about to sack me, rather than lose on two fronts, why don't I just make these other people like me? The Bible said the master commended him. That's by the way. That's not the point of the parable. So you would be wrong to now make what was a side note the central point of the parable. I hope you now get what I'm talking about. To now take this parable and say, even Jesus supports being corny. No, that's not the point. He commended it does not mean he supports it. Do you get the point? So the major reason why he told the parable are those two things I said. So that's what we see in Luke chapter 16, the parable of the shrewd steward. Another thing again we see in Luke chapter 16 was Jesus Christ establishing that if a man divorces his wife and another person marries the person, they commit adultery. That is Jesus that said so. You know what? And especially in a world like ours now, where there are lots of liberality, there's a lot of choices and opinion, I understand why it might be hard for people to want to take stand like this in a world where out of five people, four people get divorced. Out of five married people, four people will eventually be divorced for many reasons. I understand why it's easy for people to say, oh, this might mean a lot of things, but I beg to differ. It's very clear that what Jesus was saying here is that if you divorce, God number one is against divorce, clearly. But Should it be? Because we also find somewhere in the gospel, Jesus gave reasons for why people might divorce. He established that for the purpose of infidelity, if you divorce, you can then go ahead and divorce. But if you get divorced, Bible speak, based on what I've read from the Bible, and I think Paul confirms the same, you're not meant to be remarried until the person is dead. On a later time, we could probably explore why he could have said that and how it relates to salvation. But that's I'm just trying to point out that there's a clear instruction on divorce and marriage in the Bible according to Jesus is in the word. It's not me saying it, it's in the word. Maybe when we get to heaven, we'll ask why, but it's in the word. I just wanted to mention. Then you have the story of the rich man and Lazarus. The summary of this story is, which I believe in this case is not a parable, but it's an actual story. I believe is an actual story. The lesson we can learn here, I think I have a video, I'm going to pin it on when I talked about it, I think sometimes last year. The summary here is not to say that rich people go to hell, poor people go to heaven. The summary of it here, of the story here, is that the reality of heaven and hell, the poor man went to heaven because he believed. He was a Christian. He believed. The rich man went to hell not because he was rich. He went to hell probably because he did not believe, because he did not fear God and all that. And then also we can learn from here that God's primary way to get people saved is through the word of God. It's through the word of God. Um, if you see a vision, thank God for people who see visions, but God's primary way of saving people is through the word. You need to hear the gospel. The Bible said faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Then how shall they be saved if there is no one to preach the word? The book of Romans chapter 10, I believe. So primary way we are saved is through the word of God. Thank God for visions, thank God for encounters, and thank God for all those, supernatural things we hear about people's transformation. But God's primary way for us to be saved is through the word, and this is what Jesus was communicating using the story of the rich man and Lazarus. I hope this is helpful. I hope this helps you. Go ahead and read Luke chapter 16, and I'll see you tomorrow when we read Luke chapter 17. Bye.